joining us. My name is Kaia Peterson. I'm the Executive Director of NeighborWorks Montana, and we are so excited to share with you about our Resident Owned Community Program. I'm joined today by Trish, and tell me how you say your last name. Trish Fauth. Trish Fauth, up in Kalispell. Perfect, good. She's a resident leader we're going to hear from, and then George Nikolakakos, who is a park owner and sold one of his communities to the ROC residents and is now on the NeighborWorks Montana board. So great to have a panel of folks to share with you from their perspective. I'm going to start out by just giving a little bit of an overview of the ROC program to get us started. So let me share my screen here and dive right in. All right. So NeighborWorks Montana, if you're not familiar with our organization, we are a statewide affordable housing nonprofit. We've been around for a little over 20 years. And historically, our focus has been on homeownership and really recognizing homeownership as a critical source of stability, wealth building, and community impact. And from there, we've really grown to focus on low and moderate income folks primarily throughout the state and creating a whole range of housing opportunities. One of the ways that is really important to us that we do that work is as a community development financial institution. So that means that we are a community lender, and you'll hear us talk a little bit about that later today in terms of the role that our loan fund plays in resident-owned communities. But we really see the combination of education and technical assistance with affordable financing and accessible financing as two critical tools that we have that help folks have access to housing opportunities that might not otherwise exist. So we've been running the ROC program in Montana for just over a decade. The resident-owned community model was started in New Hampshire over 30 years ago by a local organization there. It's a pretty interesting story. There was a group of residents who went to the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund and said, hey, our park owner is trying to sell our park. Can we sue him? Because we'd really like to keep him from selling. And the loan fund said, well, not sure what grounds you would have. Maybe we could sue them, but what if you guys just buy the park? Let's help you figure that out. And so that's what they did. And now it's grown into a national program and movement of residents purchasing their communities. So like I said, in Montana, we've been doing this for about 10 years. And this is really a housing preservation strategy. Manufactured housing is one of the largest sources of largely unsubsidized affordable housing across the country. It's considered naturally occurring affordable housing and serves primarily low-income residents. And typically in these communities, the lot rent is about half of what folks would pay for a comparable rental unit in any given market. So again, just really can be an affordable source of housing for a lot of people. One of the challenges with this type of housing is it can create instability for the folks who live there. They don't own the land, they often own their homes, but can be at risk of displacement with rising lot rents or when property is slotted for redevelopment. So, we really see this as a way to preserve existing housing, provide housing stability, maintain affordability. And then there's a number of other things that we do with the ROC program and with residents to improve the properties through infrastructure development and infrastructure upgrades, leadership development. Residents form their own board and govern through democratic cooperative principles and own their community and operate their community. So there's a lot of leadership and community engagement that's part of this work. And then there is an individual asset building element. Like I said, most people in these communities do own their own homes, and that home is an individual asset. Some research done in New Hampshire showed that homes in resident-owned communities may sell at a premium of as much as 12% over homes in investor-owned communities. We haven't done that research in Montana, but we do know that as folks' lot rents continue to rise in investor-owned parks, there is a lot to be gained from people having access to the stability that a resident-owned community offers. and that there's value in the home that translates into. So quite a few different reasons why we see this program as being so powerful and impactful. Just a little bit more on how it works, and then I think Trish and George can speak more from their experience because they've both been involved in these projects and continue to be in Trish's case. So NeighborWorks Montana is a technical assistance provider, and we work with park owners who are interested in selling their communities. We identify a price point that they're willing to sell at and a timeline, and we get that community under contract. And from there, we start working with the residents and are really side by side with the residents through the purchase process, helping them to form their cooperative and their governance structure, as well as evaluating the property and doing all of the due diligence and review that's required in any real estate transaction. And if that all goes well, then after a number of months, they sign the papers, they become the owners, and then from there, NeighborWorks Montana continues to support residents after purchase, typically for at least 10 years, providing ongoing leadership training and support, working with the boards, and doing additional leadership development and community engagement, including supporting some of those infrastructure improvements. So it's a long-term relationship we're committing to on both sides of this work. We see, you can imagine when we go and start knocking on doors and saying, hey, your community is for sale, would you like to buy it? We get a lot of funny looks, people saying, are you crazy? There's no way I can buy this place. My credit's bad. I don't have any money to bring to the deal. There's no way I could afford to be part of this million or multi-million-dollar transaction. But the power of the cooperative model is that residents together are buying that community and they're able to access financing and cover the costs of the park together through their ongoing rents. So in Montana, like I said, we're a community development lender. And so as part of that, we lend to these communities to help them purchase the land. And then we also help them attract dollars for infrastructure investment. So far in Montana, there's been about $21 million in funding that's gone into acquisitions and about $12 million in infrastructure. And that's a combination of local bank lenders, our partner ROC USA, who also provides loans, and then NeighborWorks Montana's loan fund. And then the infrastructure investment comes from quite a few different sources, including some state grant dollars. In Montana, there are now 15 resident-owned communities. Just as of January the 15th, up in Columbia Falls became resident-owned Hideaway Community. And like I said, we've been doing this for about 10 years. So it takes some time to build this up, but it's been really incredible to see so many communities taking advantage of this and getting this opportunity. So it serves about 600 homes and over 1,300 residents statewide. And then nationally, like I said, ROC USA is that national partner who really helped bring that New Hampshire model to a broader scale. We continue to partner very closely with them. And you can see here that there are now resident-owned communities in 20 states with over 19,000 homes and 287 communities. One of the things that's really incredible about the ROC approach is that there are no communities that have defaulted on any of their financing. These are really stable communities. And we work really hard with them to make sure that they have a viable business model, that they're not going to get stuck with ever increasing lot rents, and that they really are able to make the decisions about the community that are best for them. I did want to just note our ROC team. We have 4 ROC staff throughout the state. Danielle Maiden, I believe, has been able to join the call. She's our Cooperative Housing Director. She's based in Kalispell. Adam Paschal is our Acquisition Specialist, and Helena Autumn Tigert is a Program Specialist. She works with existing ROCs in kind of the north and east part of the state. She's in Great Falls. And then Joe Shapley just joined our team last week here in Missoula. I'm based in Missoula as another program specialist serving the ROCs in the western part of the state. So excited to see this really awesome team of folks supporting this work. I'll be happy to answer any additional questions people on the call have about the ROC model and approach, but I want to now pass it over to Trish who's going to share with us her experience as a resident and a resident leader. Take it away, Trish.
Hi, I'm Trish Fauth, and we moved into our resident-owned community in 2013. And I quickly started participating in different meetings and such, and became the secretary for a couple of years. And then after a few years of that, I stood down and somebody else took that role. And last year was voted to be the treasurer. And so I have been supporting our park as in that capacity for the last just over a year now. And so that's been a new process for me, but we were one of the first in Northwest Montana. So our big struggle in our park has been to just get community involvement and get new volunteers for the board of directors. So we've had growing pains with that, but the amount and level of support that we get from Kaia and her team have just been phenomenal. They've done so much training with us and really helped us to get to a point where our meetings are nice and succinct and to the point, and they don't last 4 hours. And so, but we went through a period where our meetings were 2 or 3 hours long trying to get everything together. So their support has been invaluable to us.
So Trish, tell us, because you lived in the community when it became resident owned, right? Isn't that what? No,
I moved in about 5 years after it became resident owned. Yeah.
And when you moved in, was that part of what made you interested in it, or it was what was available?
It was what was available. So I didn't even really realize that it was resident owned until after I moved in. And I didn't even know what the resident owned was until I went to my first meeting, my first annual meeting.
It's a big learning curve, huh?
It is. Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And I think that as we have more communities, we're going to see more people that understand the model. But when people first move in, it's a little bit of a culture shock, because you're used to, just somebody that tells you how to do everything, and you don't really have a say. And so it's been very nice to be able to have that voice in our park and say what projects are important, and just be able to really bring the community together.
Yeah. And so now that you live there, as long as you have and been part of this as long as you have, how do you think about it in terms of what the benefit is to you and the impact to you compared to what it would have been like if you weren't living in a resident-owned community?
So I think that the best part is just being able to be involved. So things don't change in the park without us making sure that the residents know. Whereas under a typical landlord and landowner, those changes are just decided by that person. So, we recently just went through and updated all of our water meters. And so that was a large infrastructure project, but had we been a standard community, we probably would not have gotten any notice about it other than this is happening now. And we wouldn't have had a voice in how that happened. And so having that opportunity has just been huge for me. I like to know what's going on with my community, and I like to be able to say, well, I know that this project is important, but maybe this project is a little bit more important. And being able to help determine and give priorities.
Yeah, having that that control and that engagement is so different. We talk a lot about that in the resident purchase process, folks moving from being a tenant to an owner. I love the way that you said that. It's really a culture shift and a culture shock for a lot of people. Yeah, that's great. And what are your lot rents now?
We are at 316.
And I know for that market, the lot rents are going up and up. Do you know what some of your neighbors and other non-resident owned community parks are paying now?
The last time I heard one was a little over a year ago, and it was $450.
Yeah. So significant difference for you all.
And I imagine with the change in the economy, that has gone up since then. So
yeah. I often hear ROC residents also talk about just getting to know their neighbors, that you know, there's this idea that folks are living close to each other and know each other, but that's not always the case. But the resident engagement and resident decision process really does create a different sense of community. Any examples of that, or what does that spark for you?
So last year I've done 2 separate grants for our park. One was like a community garden area, and the other one was last year we purchased picnic tables and a barbecue gazebo to have near our community center, so that we can engage our community and try to have that togetherness.
That's great. I know, especially during COVID, with folks being isolated, it's been really wonderful to have some ways to give people an outdoor space to gather in and get the kids outside, and that's wonderful. Very
and
cool.
When Lori was the president, we set up our community center. So now we've got an indoor space and an outdoor space for our community. So that's going to be amazing this summer to be able to put that into use.
That's great. Well, let's turn over to George now. I'm sure we'll have more questions and discussion with you, Trish, but love to introduce George and hear your perspective on this, George.
Yeah, hi guys. So I had an outline here where I was going to talk about, and then I saved over it last night, but it wasn't super complicated. So I'm just going to introduce myself and my background and just do it freestyle. So I've been a real estate investor for about 15 years now. I was active duty Air Force, and as I was in the military, I was basically accumulating little rental properties. And in 2013, I bought my first mobile home park. You know, I was kind of riding this Montana real estate wave, which hasn't been very hard these last 10 years. You know, if you bought one property and it did really well, and then you just kind of leverage that into another one. So what a lot of these investors have been doing recently. So I was riding a good wave. It was working out really well for me. And I came across an opportunity to buy a mobile home park, which was a new asset class to me. And I looked into it. I went to that mobile home boot camp you guys have probably heard of many of you, Frank Rolf's, so I could learn about it. And then I bought this community. I realized pretty quickly, and I've since bought 2 others, right? So I realized pretty quickly though, that this was a totally different asset class. And like there was a pretty big power imbalance. And I realized that I had all the cards in every dealing with these folks, just because of the dynamic of having a home that really can't move. And I realized, holy mackerel, I could do whatever I want here pretty much. I'm like the king of the castle. These people can't just pack their stuff up and leave. And, you know, I realized that economically that was great, but I was like, wow, you know, other folks might not decide to, you know, act in a really ethical way in situations like this. And of course, I started seeing that happen around me. So I was always a little uncomfortable with that dynamic, and I tried to do my best, and definitely benefited from it personally. So when the time came to sell it, I knew about this program through NeighborWorks. They're really good at marketing, getting their name out there. So I knew it existed. I knew ROC existed. So I reached out to those folks and was able to sell my park to the tenants, which you know, through this program, which I thought was fantastic, made me feel good. I walked away doing very, very well. I'm not going to lie, right? I like to think though that tennis did pretty well, because that was what, Kaia, that was now, how many years ago was that? Not a lot, 2 years ago?
2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah, the thing is worth about twice what I sold it. I know that. So, but so the tenants that, it's a win-win, right? And I guess that's the idea is I've always looked for ways where everybody kind of leaves the transaction or deal winning. And you don't see that happening a lot in the mobile home community world, right? So ownership side, at least, it seems to be a one side gain and the other side paying all the time. And so I then got involved. State Senator here in Great Falls was working on some right to purchase legislation, which I really supported in our legislature. Didn't make it through. It became more of a incentive. They added some capital gain incentives. I think we could actually improve that more. I'm actually running for legislature here this next session. I'd like to work on that aspect a little bit. And then I took a position on the board with NeighborWorks and working with the resident owned communities. It's just a program I really believe in. I think that we can, I'm still a free market guy. I'm not going to lie. I still believe in the free market, but I do think that right to purchase and increasing opportunities for tenants to own and buy and purchase their own communities really is kind of the way out of this, that unethical, in my opinion, dynamic we have with mobile home parks. I think it's very unique. It's different than apartments, and we have to kind of sell that to a lot of these people who don't want to do anything that that messes with market dynamics or whatever. But I think if you can convince and get people to really wrap their head around the fact that mobile home ownership in a park is a very unique situation that requires kind of unique solutions, I think we can make some progress in that regard. What I always tell people, like in Montana, our politics are kind of, it's still the Hun, right politics is what I call, but there's still good folks, I think, who are open-minded enough and can listen and are willing to listen on this. I think we came closer than many expected last time to doing something. What else? And that's about all. I'm going to answer any questions folks have about selling. My sale went really well. I really felt like I was dealing with a private buyer. It was longer. There was some it was, my particular deal was a little more complicated, which I think many private buyers would have just, had an issue with. So, but as far as the process and dealing with it, now watching it from the other side, I was actually just on a call yesterday looking at a community with NeighborWorks with Danielle, they're trying to, look at some of these numbers, see how it works. And that's fun and that's interesting. And yeah, I think it's something we can grow, but boy, sometimes it does feel uphill. Now I'm feeling it on the other side, right? So I'm watching how hard it is when you're crunching some of these numbers and you're going up against private equity groups or big money folks who can, who have a lot of leverage. And then you're just trying to do the right thing and just compete in that game. And it's pretty tough. And then I get pretty frustrated and, I start, wanting to wage political war. Then, take a deep breath. Okay, all right. Well, there's, we got to take a long-term outlook here. But yeah, it's been exciting to be involved with NeighborWorks. I think these people are doing amazing work and with ROC. So it's been inspiring for me. And that's what
Thanks
I got.
so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's great. You're getting all perspectives here today. So we would like to open the floor for questions. Folks who've joined, please feel free to unmute your line, turn on video if you'd like. You can also pop questions into the chat if you prefer. I was just going to share a couple other things while folks are thinking about questions. We work so closely with ROC USA, and you saw that map nationally of the other ROCs across the country who have organizations like NeighborWorks Montana supporting them. And we just have really seen, like we've talked about today, the power of this model. And we're starting to look at some other types of communities where cooperatives and resident ownership may be a viable fit. So right now we're looking at a project in Missoula of an 8-plex multifamily property and exploring whether resident purchase and conversion to ownership there would be an opportunity. And it's been really interesting talking to land trust organizations and cooperative organizations across the country. They really do look to the ROC model as one of the ones that's been stood up as being a successful approach, an approach where residents really have been able to take control to real benefit to the residents, and also to the communities. You know, we talk to municipalities and elected officials and school districts and neighbors and all these folks all across the state. And there is still a lot of stigma against manufactured housing and against trailer parks in particular. But we've seen that dynamic starting to shift as people really confront the affordable housing crisis that we face in our state and nationally, as this type of housing is recognized as affordable and as viable, and as really providing some benefits to residents, having their own space, a place that they call their own home. And I think the ROC program has really helped to build some more pride and ownership and some awareness about why this housing is important. So again, that ROC approach is really much better understood now than it was a decade ago, and seen as a model that could be translated into other settings. George, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, just speaking to the stigma, which is interesting because maybe in Montana a little less than other places, right? Because we all have, most of us have an aunt or a grandparent or somebody who lives in a mobile home, a little less, but it's of course still out there. But I will say in the investor world right now, that stigma is gone, right? So I remember when I bought that first community, I would say 2/3 of the time, well, I bought a mobile home park, kind of somebody would kind of squint or look at me like, you did what? Like, what is that? What are you doing? Now, if you tell someone, oh, I own a mobile home park, they're like, ooh, wow, like you must be doing really well. Or so in investor circles, a mobile home park now has a kind of cachet, actually, how, the assumption is you're a smart, sophisticated investor who's making good purchases. That may or may not be true, but it's been interesting just in about 10 years to watch that shift. And I'm talking, I have family on the East Coast, even, going back to the East Coast, talking to people who aren't as familiar with even mobile home residents as something common. It's that stigma on the investor side definitely is gone. And I think, like you're saying, I think that's slowly starting to fade away across the board. And I would love, and I know we've talked about this, to see new construction, more new parks going up, and doing it in a community land trust type model where the land was community owned or something like that would be amazing. Just so right out the gate, but I know that's tough. It's tough to make it pencil, and the capital requirements are extreme going in, so.
Yeah, and the regulatory environment can make that really difficult too, partly just the costs involved. But we are starting to see the economics on that shift. I know that there's a company in Bozeman that's building a manufactured home park there. We've seen some interest up in the Flathead, and it will be really interesting as the market and the financial dynamics continue to shift if new construction of manufactured home parks becomes more viable. Trish, were you going to say something?
I think that people's perception is still an issue as far as manufactured home parks in their communities. So I know that we had a couple of parks that were going to be built that the communities came out to, like their community meetings and voted those down. So I'm looking forward to seeing more communities that are more willing to incorporate manufactured home parks, because it really is more affordable for those of us that can't afford a $500,000 house.
Yeah, Trish, anything else you would want to say about the stigma and just the dynamics around that in your experience?
When I was younger, manufactured or trailer parks were exactly that. They were a trailer park. They were typically low income. We're seeing not as much of that stigma anymore. When I say I live in a manufactured home, they're like, oh, that was a wise choice with the economy the way it is now. And so we're seeing not as much of a stigma when you're talking about where you live in this day. Whereas in the past, there was definitely a trailer park vibe, but with the resident owned communities, because we take so much pride in those, I think that you just don't see that with us anymore.
Yeah. I thought it might be interesting for folks to hear a little bit about who lives in your community. Like, and George, you could probably speak to this too. Who lives there? Families, old people, kids, like what do people do for work? Tell us about the people who live there. Trish, do you want to speak to Green Acres a little bit? Give people
Sure.
a sense like there.
So we have a pretty diverse set. So we've got a couple of families with kids that live in the park. And we have families that are retired, or people that are retired that live in the park. And then we have like newly empty nest people that live in the park, such as myself. And you just see a wide range of laborers all the way up to professionals that live here in the park. And we have our disabled people that are in the park, our older generation that aren't as mobile that are here in the park. It just really is pretty diverse as far as what we have. It's an interesting mashup of who's in the park. You know, you've got your retired electrician, and you've got your guy that works construction every day, and just it's just amazing. Or you've got the people that work from home like me, or the people that work retail. So we've got all of those different things in the park. So it's our community events are really interesting because you really get to see those people and interact with them. And I think it's more diverse in here than it would be in a standard community, just because some of the people in the park have owned their home for 20 years, and some people have owned their home for 10 years, and some have just moved into the park. So so you just get that wide range of different people that do different things. And whereas in a neighborhood with a traditional home, those people all have to be on a certain income level to live there. So you don't get as much diversity, I don't think, in those other communities.
Yeah, it really is such a mix. And one thing that I've always been so struck by is it's people making really good decisions for themselves and their families, like good financial decisions, the opportunity to stay in a community that they want to be in, whether that's the Flathead or Missoula or other places with rising prices. I know I've seen a lot of retirees, a lot of single parents, a lot of folks who are just starting out, just gotten out of the military and are trying to get their feet under them, and what their next step is and build a family. And it really is, it can be a stepping stone or a place where people stay for many, many years. Like you said, there's this concept that manufactured housing is mobile, and that's not really the reality. George, anything you would add to that? And then I'm going to open it up for some more questions, and we'll probably wrap it up from there.
No, that sounds about right. I mean, it's a pretty diverse, a lot of retirees in the two communities. Elderly folks on fixed incomes, just kind of terrifying when you think about the situation as far as what's happening with rents. Lots of retail workers, a lot of retail workers, like the people who, when you're driving down the main drag of your town, right, like who work at the Target, at the Walgreens, at the Burger King, at Home Depot. A lot of those just regular retail workers on the one end, with maybe young families starting out or young couples just getting a start, and a lot of retirees on the other end, right? So yeah, pretty big mix of folks. Working class people.
Great. Well, some of you may have joined this conversation because you attended the Big Sky Documentary Film Festival and saw the film A Decent Home. Some of you may not be familiar with that. I was going to post the link in the chat here. It's a film that was created by a filmmaker out of Los Angeles who traveled around the country and looked at manufactured home parks, primarily in Colorado is where she ended up focusing, but it gives you a really great picture on, who are the folks who live in these communities and what are some of the challenges they're facing, and some of the ideas around, again, why this housing is important and what some of the opportunities are for maintaining affordability. So great to check out if you haven't seen that. Any questions from attendees today?
I have a question.
Great, go ahead, Josh. Your video feed's a little tricky. Maybe turn off your video.
Okay. Is that better?
Much
Is
better.
that
Yep.
better? Okay, perfect.
Yep,
Sounds
we can hear you.
good.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm Josh from down in Woods Bay, just outside of Big Fork. And thank you all for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. Just had a question. I think this would be, mainly for Kaia and George. In terms of the process when the land changes homes, I'm just kind of curious about the steps. So first, is the property always effectively purchased by NeighborWorks? And then from there, how does it get into the hands of the residents? And then lastly, if a resident wants to essentially sell their share or portion later on down the road, how does that work? Because my understanding is there's a way that you guys kind of control the future purchase price to keep it stable. So I was just curious how that all worked.
George, you want to take that first process question at least?
Well, my understanding, I thought that was more you, but yeah, my understanding is that the tenants form a cooperative. So they form a corporation, with the help of ROC or NeighborWorks, right? And so they're an entity, just like any other entity that would buy a park, right? Or buy a property. So they formed a legal entity. Now they have their own board, right? Their own bylaws, their own rules, but you transfer title to that entity. They purchase it from you. They have their own financing, right? And then that entity is controlled by the board, right? It doesn't even have to necessarily be every member of that mobile home community. So only, I think, I don't know, I forget the percent. Is it 80%? I think if 80% of the members agree, you could even have 20% of the members of the mobile home community who didn't want to join a co-op or form an entity, and they just get to live in the park as residents, right? Like they're not going to be a part of this ownership deal. So it's basically just a group of people with the help of others forming an entity, getting financing and purchasing a community, just like any other entity. And so when you sell, you just sell to that entity. Of course, NeighborWorks, in our case in Montana, is doing a lot of the legal work and legal assistance and helping them and it really did feel to me like I felt no difference. I was dealing with Danielle than other transactions I made with private buyers. There's a buy sell, it's just that it was whatever community LLC, and they made an offer. They had a contingency to do their inspections. We did the inspections, and we closed. Title goes to their entity, and I get my check, and it was pretty easy peasy. It's not very complicated, except for the folks doing the work. The hard work is being done by the guys in the ground, organizing the residents, setting up their board, having them get all together. That's the hard work, but that kind of happens on the nonprofit end. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I hit all aspects of it.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit to that, George, but go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, that does. Thank you, George. But yeah, then I'm curious to hear what you have to say too, Kaia. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So the cooperative or the resident organization is made up of owners in the park. So sometimes there are renters. They're not able to be voting members of the co-op. But as George was saying, we have to have at least 75% of the homes have to be owner occupied. So up to 25% can be rentals. And then the threshold for participation is that we need at least 51% of the owner occupied households to participate and become members of the co-op. So it's a little bit lower bar. Some of our funding sources require 60%, but it does give the flexibility that not everybody has to participate. And then the way that folks join is they pay a member fee. And typically that member fee is somewhat similar to a security deposit amount. In most of the communities we've worked with, it's been around $100. That's a one-time lifetime membership fee. So that's their buy-in to the cooperative and to the organization. If they choose to move, they sell their home just like they would in any other community, or they can choose to move their home out and they get their membership fee back. So whoever moves then into that lot or into that home does have to become a member of the cooperative and be vetted and approved by through the property management and membership process.
Right. And you know what's interesting, Kaia? I would like to see, and maybe you have, it brings to mind to me a long-term study, say 10 or 15 years down the road of ROC ownership, of what a mobile home in a ROC is worth on the market, right, for sale versus what a private one is worth. Because market dynamics tell you that a mobile home in a ROC should be, its value is going to be way higher, way more protected. It should be way more desired, right? Because you know that your rents are going to be controlled. You know you have an ownership stake when you get in there. You know it's going to be right. So I bet if you take Park A and Park B, and one is resident owned and one isn't, starting on day one, and you fast forward 10 years, Park A's, the homes, the resale value of the homes that people have in there are going to be much higher and much more desirable than the homes that are in Park B, which remains privatized. So as far as the ownership goes, when you go to sell a home, you definitely want to be in ROC, since you know your rent's not going to be doubling every 5 years, right, or every 7 years, or maybe less in some cases, and which is constantly eroding home value. So yeah, that's just a little aspect to consider there about ownership. I mean, the ownership is communal in a sense, right? It's a co-op, but at the same time, the stake you have in your home is really affected by that underlying ownership too.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen in New Hampshire. And yeah, anything you'd add, Trish?
Yeah, so we've had a couple of people that were like, well, how do I sell my lot? And you don't sell your lot. You don't personally own that lot. The community owns the lot. So yes, I own my home, I own my lot as long as I am a resident owner. But I don't have, my name's not on the deed. The community's name is on the deed and the land ownership. So when I give up my owner occupied status, then I am no longer an owner of that lot. I only own the lot because I live here and I am a member of the co-op.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. Any other questions or follow-up? Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up. So again, so great to have you all join us. Thank you so much, Trish and George, for having this conversation with us today. Like I said, it is recorded, and we'll hopefully be sharing it in other settings. And if anyone on the call has follow-up questions or further interest, we always love to hear from you. Again, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.